Dr. Anna Wallace is the Fruit IPM coordinator at Cornell IPM, and we're very excited that she has joined us today to talk about how to get your home fruit plantings ready for winter. So go ahead, Anna.
Thanks, Amara. So I'm thrilled to be here today. This is one of my favorite seasons as the fall comes in and we have crisp, clear air and all the harvest activities are happening. So I'm sure that many of you are also harvesting things and thinking about the change of the seasons. So I'll be talking a little bit about fall cleanup in the home orchard. I am the Fruit IPM coordinator with the IPM program at Cornell. And I work a lot with commercial audiences, but I really love working with people that have fruit trees in their backyard because there is so much that we can also do to implement IPM on a home by home level. So the first thing that I want to remind you, I think we all know that orchard management is very seasonal. So we're here in the fall season right now, and there's a lot of work that we can do to enjoy our home orchards, but also be thinking about pest management. But I think one of the reasons we love orchards is they are so seasonal. So soon we'll be in the winter period, and then spring we'll see a beautiful bloom. And all the work that we do during the summer as well is important for pest management. So I'll talk a little bit about fall management, but also I want to remind you about things that we do not do in fall, but we do in other seasons. So while we're thinking about the fall, obviously we're talking about harvest, and there's a lot of cleaning up and then protecting that I'll talk a little bit about each one. So right now there's still a lot of leaves on the trees, but pretty soon, even in a month, our trees will start to look like this. All the leaves will fall to the ground, and we'll sort of have a skeleton of trees. This is a commercial orchard, but I think you get the idea. And so the first thing that I recommend that you do during this time in the fall, and then maybe a little bit into the winter, is clean up your leaf litter. And this is a little bit counterintuitive. A lot of our home gardening, we're talking about adding nutrition back to the soil, not cutting out our grasses and the remnants of our garden from the summer because it provides really beautiful habitat for a lot of species. But in the orchard, we like to clean up our leaf litter and clean up our debris for a few different reasons. And the first one is that many fungal pathogens overwinter on leaf tissue. So one of the most important diseases of apples, and very similar to other diseases in other fruit crops, is apple scab. So if you have apple trees in your backyard, you're probably familiar. Apple scab is caused by this fungus called Venturaria inequalis, and it looks like this on the fruit. It causes these scabby lesions on both the fruit and on the leaf tissue, and it can defoliate the entire tree if you have a very susceptible variety. And then these scabs on the fruit can cause really severe damage. They can be a little bit aesthetic. They won't hurt you if you're eating them. But eventually, if you get too much infection, they can cause the fruit to crack open and it will not be edible and it won't store well. So it's important to make sure that you're taking care of this disease. So here's a beautiful life cycle that was drawn by Dr. Kara Cox, who is a professor at Cornell. And it just shows that these leaves and fruit scab lesions are going to build up during the season, and then they're going to fall to the ground in the leaf litter. And those leaves are where the pathogen is going to overwinter and cause new infections in the spring to the new green tissue. So if we can interrupt that life cycle and pick up those leaves, we'll be removing a lot of inoculum or disease spores that will go on to infect the tree again in the spring. So we're cleaning up all the leaves and we're getting that disease potential out of the orchard. Another thing that you should be doing during your fall cleanup is picking up not just the leaves, but also the fruit. And so these are also potentially harboring overwinter disease and insect infestations. So I'm always recommending that we're picking up any dropped fruit, cleaning it up out of the orchard or off of the tree, because sometimes the fruit will not fall off the tree, it will stay on the trees. And so it's a great idea to be taking that out of the orchard as you're going through and doing your fall cleanup. And so on the left here, I have a picture of codling moth, and this is a really important pest in apples. These guys, if you ever find a worm in your fruit, this is one of the most common offenders. And so you can see in that seed cavity, typically they tunnel into the fruit and they're feeding directly on the seeds. There are a couple of other caterpillars that might cause this kind of damage. But you can see that caterpillar right in the seed cavity, and that's codling moth, and it's one of the most common ones. And in these raspberries on the right, they're kind of shriveled up and they're being infested by spotted-winged Drosophila or other fruit flies. And so both these fruits will fall to the ground typically, and then the insects can overwinter there and then survive and then pupate and emerge for the next season. So if you're cleaning up the fruit out of your orchard that's fallen to the ground or is still on the trees, you're removing that potential insect infestation as well. Okay, the next thing that I'd like to remind you to do during this season is protecting your plants from this kind of damage. So if you've had a home orchard in the past, you may have seen this kind of gnawing in the past. And so I'll give you a second to guess for yourself what you think that is. And so at this point in the season, we can be thinking about mowing the grass and cleaning up weeds, which will help prevent it. And so this is potential rodent or rabbit damage. So these rodents and rabbits can come into the orchard, and in the winter, when there are very few resources for them to feed on, they can gnaw at the bark, and they're trying to get at the bark and the first layer of green cambium underneath the bark, which is a nutritious food source when other resources are scarce during the winter. And this is especially true if there's a lot of weed debris or plant or habitat in or around the orchard that can protect the rodents and rabbits. So one of the things that we recommend you do in snowy years, often voles will burrow under the ground or through the snow and be looking for resources and gnaw at the bark. And so what can happen is the cambium is really important tissue for keeping the trees alive. It includes all the vascular tissue, so all of the piping in the trees that's going to carry water and nutrients. And so if they gnaw all the way around the bottom of the trunk of the tree, especially in these little trees, small caliper or small diameter trees, it can outright kill the plant. And this can happen both above and below ground. There are some voles that are running around above the ground and some that are running around below the ground. So we have to think about protecting a little bit below the ground as well. So one of the things that you can do to reduce this pressure is removing the weeds and mowing. And so that will remove some of the other plant debris, resources, and refuge that will help these rodents and rabbits hide in the orchard and around the orchard. Here's another picture of some really extensive rabbit damage that will really hurt this bush. Oops. So a mower can be your best friend if you can cut the grass a little bit lower. At this point in the season, it's not growing too actively anymore, but getting a nice low mowing between trees and also very close around the trees, right at the base of the trees. This is a pretty large mower. I expect most of you don't have a mower with this wide of a deck, but any mower is great. Weed whackers also work, but when you're using a weed whacker, I want to caution that you are very, very careful when you're near the base of a tree, because you could inadvertently do the same thing that these rodents are doing. If you accidentally hit the base of the tree, you could also girdle the base of the tree and destroy that cambium the same way that the rodents would. So here are a couple of the potential offenders. Orchard voles, there are two primary species that we have in our region. One is a meadow vole and one is a woodland or a pine vole. They're slightly different in size, and one of them is above ground typically. So mostly our meadow voles are traveling above ground, and then the woodland or pine vole is often underground. So you can be looking for tunneling around your trees where they might be hiding. Okay, the next thing that I want to remind you to do at this point in the season is to prevent this kind of damage. And so we want to protect our trees from additional forms of wildlife. And this is damage caused by deer browsing. It's a little higher in the tree. It's kind of a clean cut where the deer teeth have snipped it off, and they will feed on almost all the new shoots in an unprotected orchard. And they will go to pretty great lengths. So when you can see this deer is jumping up into the canopy and eating fruit and new shoots off of the tree. So one of the things that you can be looking for is damage higher in the tree that would be potentially deer damage, as opposed to lower in the tree around the base of the tree, like I showed you, was the rodent or rabbit or vole damage. And so to prevent this, we can install a barrier like a fence or a cage at the base of the trees to protect against this wildlife. So in a commercial orchard, we're typically recommending a pretty serious fence. This is a high tensile wire fence. It's typically 9 or more feet tall because deer can jump very high. So you might not need something this serious in your home orchard, but it's an important reminder that deer will be able to jump over a fence if it isn't tall enough or if it isn't narrow enough inside the space. So you could install a fence around each individual tree or making sure that it's tall enough that they can't jump over it if you're enclosing a larger area. And then to protect against rodents, you can install a cage at the base of the tree, which might look like this chicken wire, but it should be above the ground, about 12 inches above the ground, as well as 4 inches below the ground, so that you're protecting against those underground voles as well. So those were some of the cleanup things that you can be thinking about in the fall. As you're moving into winter, you can also be thinking about a couple of things that will help with your IPM, including pruning and planning for next season. So we don't have time to go into all the horticultural aspects of pruning right now, but I think this simple diagram is really nice for thinking about the different kinds of pruning cuts and objectives for when you're doing your pruning. When we're thinking about IPM, the main benefits that we're going to get from pruning are removing dead and diseased wood. So you're again removing all of that inoculum from potential disease infections from previous seasons that would go on to infect your trees in future seasons. You can also be removing crossing branches and water sprouts or redundant branches. And this is just opening up the canopy. It's increasing the sunlight. It's improving the drying time so it doesn't get too shaded, too humid, and it allows more air to get through. And I like to say air is your best fungicide because the more dry that you are, the less potential environment there is for disease growth and activity. So if you have good air moving through your canopy, it's sort of the opposite of your wet, damp basement, right? So it will not be very conducive to disease development. So pruning can help with that. As we're moving into spring, I would encourage you to spend a little bit of time studying over the winter about what is going to happen in terms of your tree development and how you can protect those buds and blossoms from the insects and diseases that are going to emerge in the springtime, which is the best time to manage them. And so as soon as we see the first buds breaking, the first green tissue emerging, it's really important to protect that tissue. Because as a plant starts to grow in the spring, the insects and diseases that are wanting to eat it or wanting to infect it are also active at that time. So we talked about apple scab a little bit before, and as soon as green tissue is present, diseases like apple scab are able to infect that really succulent, susceptible green tissue. So in apples and in other tree fruit, we think about different bud stages and what is active at each of these stages. And then we want to protect our trees accordingly. So over the winter, I would encourage you to do a little bit of studying and reading about these different bud stages. Because like I said, this phenological stage is a good indicator of when pests are active. And then you can start to learn which pests are active at which stage and what you need to be doing to protect the trees. So a lot of homework for the winter months. And I want to encourage you to visit some of the fruit resources that we have on the Cornell IPM website, as well as other resources that are available on the Cornell Fruit Resources website that can help you learn about some of these things. And so there is a great list of recordings on, it's an Apple IPM intensive workshop. that was offered through Cornell IPM if you really want to learn a lot about apple IPM and all the different pests. There's a great guide called Cornell Guide for Growing Fruit at Home. And this goes through a lot of the basics of fruit management in your home orchard. And then if you really want to be an apple IPM expert, there is this Apple IPM for Beginners guide. There's a similar stone fruit IPM for Beginners guide as well if you have stone fruit trees. And it looks like Amara or Matt has added those links to the chat, so you could copy those down for yourself. Or I believe they're going to include them in the notes for the recording when it is posted later. So thank you for listening in about some of your fall orchard cleanup and some advice that I had for you. If there are questions, I'll check out the chat window and see if I can answer them now. But please feel free to ask questions, and here's my email if you have questions to follow up afterwards. And so I see there's a question about quince being susceptible to the same diseases as apples, and that's a great question. Apples, pears, and quince are all part of the pome fruit group, and so they're all very physiological, the same. They're very much related, and so they are susceptible to a lot of the same diseases. And that would be compared to stone fruits, which are cherries, plums, peaches, apricots, and they're susceptible to some of the same diseases, but often have their own types of diseases. But many of the fungal diseases operate the same way. They have to overwinter somehow, and often that's on plant debris on the ground in the orchard, and so cleaning that up can help. And then there's a question from Julie about what do you do with the leaves? Compost won't kill the spores. And so my advice there is you can rake up your leaves, you can move them out, and as long as they're far enough from the orchard, they won't, the spores won't be released back into the canopy. And actually just turning the leaves over so that when the spores are released, they're released down into the ground can make a big impact. So just moving them out of your orchard, not keeping them right under the trees will be a pretty big impact. Lucette has a good question about dormant oil spray. And so in the spring, right before the buds break, that's a really good time for a dormant oil spray. So as you are walking through your orchard in the early spring, you start to see the buds swelling, that will be a great time to be applying a dormant oil. Another great question about watering during this time of year. Watering becomes less important at this point in the season. If you have a crop on your tree still, and you're trying to make sure the fruit are really good size, it's important to be watering up until harvest. But if you have a larger tree with deep taproots, that's not as essential. And then you want to stop watering at some point and providing nutrition so that the trees can overwinter, they can acclimate for the winter. And so usually around the solstice, the tree goes through a transition from spring into the fall. So spring is sort of a growth stage and building, and then in the fall, we're sort of moving towards senescence or moving toward fall and winter dormancy. So leading up until the beginning of harvest is a good time to be adding water. Nutrition usually stops around the solstice. But around this time of year, I would say if you've made it to harvest, watering is probably not as critical. All right, Amara, I don't know how much more time we have. Do I have time for another question, or I'll move to the chat?
One more question. Yeah.
Okay. So we have a question about sour cherry dropping leaves early due to the last summers. It definitely could be related to drought. If you have a way to irrigate your trees, I definitely recommend that, like I said, leading up until harvest. But there are other things as well. So maybe you want to take a leaf sample and you could send that to get a leaf nutrient analysis and see if you have a nutritional potential problem. Or if you have any kind of spotting on the leaves, that might be an indication that you have some kind of infection. There are a couple of fungal diseases and bacterial diseases that can affect cherry. So if you have some photos, I'd suggest you send those into your local extension or send them to us and we could take a look for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. This is very informative. And if there are additional questions we didn't get to in the chat, we will share those with Anna later so that we can include them on our recording. And if you have a question you didn't get a chance to ask yet, it's okay to keep putting it in the chat. We are going to transition into our IPM minute, which is me. So I am Dr. Amara Dunn-Silver. I'm the biocontrol specialist with the Cornell Integrated Pest Management Program. And if you have been following us on What's Bugging You First Friday for this year, you might know that we're doing a series of steps in how we feed friendly insects. And today's step that we're focusing on is planting in the fall. So I just learned this week that chaos gardening was a thing. Some of you already may have known about it. I have not read all these articles, but apparently the idea that you can just throw seeds out and create a garden and it's low maintenance is very popular. So we're cool and we didn't even know it, because I think that this chaos gardening actually sounds a lot like what we're focused on here today, which is feeding friendly insects. Just a reminder that the friendly insects that we're feeding are both pollinators, like this bee, and insect natural enemies of pests, insects that can help you with pest control, like this lacewing larva. We're providing them with food and shelter in the form of plants. These are plants that produce a lot of pollen and nectar or have some structural component that provides a place for the insects to live. This QR code you will see throughout the slides. It's more information about all the details for feeding friendly insects, and we'll put the link in the chat as well. The protection piece really comes from being thoughtful and reducing your pesticide applications where you can. And throughout this series, we're focused on perennials. You can feed friendly insects with annual plants, but we're talking about perennials here. They can be very rewarding, although they do take a little bit of time to establish. Once they are established, they can be a lot lower maintenance. So we are at step 4 of installation, or in getting these perennials established, planting in the fall. If you join us for our 2026 What's Bugging You First Friday series, we'll talk about some maintenance tasks. You have probably heard that fall is for planting, specifically perennials. And the reason that fall is a good time for planting perennials is if you are transplanting, it can be a less stressful time to get your perennials in the ground. The soil is still warm. Often there's extra moisture in the ground, although depending on where you are in New York State, there is not extra moisture in the ground right now. I'm in Geneva and we are still quite dry here. If you are planting seeds, you are giving those seeds a chance to experience what's called stratification, which is the seeds experiencing different environmental conditions that tell them it is okay to germinate. If you were to plant them in the spring, you might need to stratify them before you put them outside. So by planting in the fall, you're letting nature do your work for you. If you were transplanting this fall, especially this fall, depending on where in New York State or another part of the country you are, you do want to make sure that you water your transplants well when you get them in the ground until we start getting some fall rain. If you are putting seeds in the ground, remember we talked last month about scratching the soil up, removing weeds. You want to have a crumbly soil. Sprinkle the seeds on the ground, scratch them in pretty shallowly, no more than about 1/4 of an inch, and then press them into the soil. This could be with your hands or stomping your feet or something larger depending on the area you're seeding. You want to create really good seed to soil contact. I also like to label where I have planted my seeds so that I know where to look for them in the spring. And that is fall planting in a nutshell. Again, there's a lot more information on our website if you're looking for more details. And in 2026, we'll talk about some of those maintenance tasks that I showed you earlier.